welcome to Chore Chapters, because everyday tasks need good company. I'm Leo, and with me as always, we have got Luna.
Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today we've got a thrilling and interesting story lined up, so grab your headphones and let's dive straight into the story.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a man named Anthony Porter, right? His IQ is just 51. I mean, that puts him squarely in the range of intellectual disability.
Yeah.
And he came within 50 hours of being executed by the state of Illinois, just like 2 days away. That fact alone, it really hits you, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, what's striking from the sources you've shared is that the stay, it wasn't granted at first because someone found new evidence he was innocent. Not at all.
Right.
It was specifically because of concerns about his intellectual capacity. Like, could he even legally or morally be put to death if he didn't fully grasp why? That whole procedural question, stemming from his low IQ, that's what bought him crucial time.
Time, yeah, but not proof of innocence. Not then, anyway. This whole incredibly complex story, it really centers on the brutal 1982 murders of Marilyn Green, who was 19, and Jerry Hillard, 18, in a Chicago park. And Porter was convicted and sentenced to death really fast back in 1983.
And then almost 2 decades later, you get this development that made national headlines. A group of university journalism students got involved.
Right, the Medill students.
Exactly. Their investigation famously led to Porter's exoneration in 1999. And then another man, All-Story Simon, was convicted instead. For a lot of people, that looked like a clear win, a wrongful conviction fix.
Except, well, as the sources lay out, the story is just far, far messier than that. Because All-Story Simon, the man convicted later, he himself was eventually exonerated too.
Yeah.
Which raises these really deeply unsettling questions about the methods the investigators used to free Porter in the first place.
It really does. It's like a saga showing the justice system failing not just once, maybe convicting the wrong guy initially, but arguably failing a second time, where even these really well-intentioned efforts to fix a mistake might have actually created a whole new injustice.
It's a case study, really, in cascading system failure. That phrase seems apt.
It does. It exposes weaknesses at so many levels. The initial police work, the defense Porter got, the appeals process, and even, like you said, the ethics around these outside groups trying to right wrongs.
And the most tragic thing, the constant throughout this whole mess. The original murders, Marilyn Green and Jerry Hillard, they're still officially unsolved today. This case just left behind this legacy of, well, profound human cost. It's undeniable.
Indeed. And the materials you've given us, they really detail every twist and turn, from the crime itself right through to all the later legal challenges and the exonerations.
So in this deep dive, our mission is to use these sources, all this information, to carefully unpack this labyrinth of events. We need to try and understand what happened, why it still matters so much, and what it tells us about the pursuit of justice, which is often just really fraught and messy. Let's jump in, starting with that terrible morning back in '82.
Okay, so the crime happened around 1 a.m., August 15th, 1982. It was in Washington Park on Chicago's South Side, right near the public swimming pool there. That's where they found Marilyn Green and Jerry Hillard.
And the details of the crime itself, I mean, as described in the sources, they're just brutal. Marilyn Green was shot 3 times. 2 shots to the side of her neck, really close range, like maybe only a foot and a half away, and 1 shot to her hand. Jerry Hillard was shot twice in the head, also close range. Execution style, basically.
It was horrific. And the immediate police investigation, it pretty much zeroed right in on Anthony Porter. He was 27 then, known around there, apparently a gang member. But here's the critical thing, right from the start. There was 0 physical evidence, none linking him to the scene or the victims.
Well, so no physical evidence. The case against him then, it relied almost entirely on eyewitnesses.
Exactly. And that's where things get complicated pretty quickly, according to the sources. One key witness was a guy named William Taylor. He was apparently swimming in the park pool nearby. Now, Taylor's statements are absolutely crucial for understanding how Porter got convicted in the first place. Initially, he told the police he was in the pool. He didn't actually see the shooting itself. He just saw Porter running away afterwards.
Okay, so he saw him running away.
Right. But by the time the trial came around, his testimony had Well, it had changed dramatically.
How so?
He testified under oath at the trial that he actually saw Anthony Porter firing the shots.
Whoa. So he went from not seeing the shooting to identifying the shooter.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift. That sounds like a massive red flag looking back now. We'll definitely need to circle back to that.
Absolutely. And then there was another witness, Henry Williams. He gave supporting testimony. He claimed Porter had robbed him at gunpoint just minutes before the shooting. And then, moments later, he saw Porter standing near Jerry Hillard, holding a gun. So these two witness accounts, Taylor and Williams, they basically became the whole foundation for the prosecution's case against Porter.
And then you add in Anthony Porter's legal help, or lack thereof. The sources paint a really, really concerning picture of his defense attorney, Akeem Gersel.
Yeah, Gersel. He was reportedly hired for $10,000, but the family only managed to pay him $3,000. And there were allegations that he essentially just stopped investigating the case because he wasn't getting paid the rest. There are even reports, like you mentioned, that he literally fell asleep during the trial.
Falling asleep during a death penalty trial. I mean, that detail alone just speaks volumes about the kind of defense Porter got, doesn't it?
It really does. And here's a particularly, I guess, egregious example of how money seemed to trump his client's interests. After the jury found Porter guilty, Gersel chose to have a bench sentencing.
So just the judge deciding the sentence, not the jury.
Exactly. And his reasoning, apparently stated openly, was that it would be quicker and less work because he hadn't been paid his full fee. He bypassed a jury sentencing phase, which, might have led to a different outcome, life instead of death, maybe.
Unbelievable. So, okay, you've got questionable witness testimony, a defense that sounds severely inadequate, maybe even compromised by money, and the jury finds Porter guilty.
Right. And in September 1983, the judge, Robert L. Sklodowski, sentenced him to death. He called Porter a perverse shark during the sentencing.
A perverse shark.
Grim.
Very. The initial appeals, they mostly focus on, standard procedural stuff. There was even an issue raised about a juror who went to the same church as Marilyn Greene's mother.
Potential bias there.
Right, but even that wasn't enough to get the conviction overturned back then. The system just seemed set on moving forward.
But then, years later, something critical happened. In 1995, right? Porter's mental capacity gets evaluated.
Yes, and that evaluation confirmed his IQ was just 51, clearly placing him in the category of intellectually disabled.
And that single piece of information, his IQ score, it became pivotal. Absolutely pivotal. It wasn't about, did he do the crime or not? It was about his competency to even be executed under the law. This finding suddenly made him eligible for legal challenges based on that disability. And crucially, like we said at the start, it bought him time because he was getting very close to execution.
And that time was really running out.
Yeah.
By September 1998, Anthony Porter is still on death row. He gets an execution date set. He's just 50 hours away from lethal injection.
Just over 2 days. And it was precisely because of that competency question, the one stemming from the 95 IQ finding, that the Illinois Supreme Court finally granted a stay. But again, it's important to stress, this wasn't a challenge to his guilt at that point. It was just a pause to figure out if the state could legally execute someone with his level of intellectual disability.
Okay, so while the courts are grappling with the competency issue, sort of a separate track, that's when the external help arrives. This group of undergrad journalism students from Northwestern University.
Right, led by Professor David Protes. They started looking into Porter's case initially as a class project while this competency hearing was pending.
And they just applied basic journalism techniques, right? Like fundamental investigative steps.
Pretty much. One really key thing they did, which seems incredibly basic when you think about it, was they went back and reevaluated William Taylor's viewpoint, the witness from the swimming pool.
Yeah.
They tried to figure out, could he realistically have seen what he claimed he saw from where he was in the pool?
It's such a simple question, but apparently one that wasn't really dug into properly by the police or Porter's original defense lawyer.
Seems that way. So the students, they were working with a private investigator named Paul Ciolino, and they tracked down William Taylor.
And what happened?
Well, in December 1998, Taylor signed a sworn affidavit. And in it, he completely recanted his trial testimony. Just took it all back.
Wow. So he recanted. That's the bombshell, right? That really cracked the case open.
Absolutely. He stated flat out in the affidavit that he hadn't actually seen Porter shoot anyone. And even more damning, he claimed that the Chicago police had threatened, harassed, and intimidated him into naming Porter as the killer back in '82.
Okay, so if your key eyewitness says the police pressured him into lying,
Yeah.
That just blows the original conviction completely out of the water.
Fundamentally undermines it, yeah. So, with Taylor's testimony now basically gone, the investigation needed a new focus. And surprisingly, the next lead actually came from Anthony Porter himself from death row.
Really? What did he say?
He told the student investigators, "Find Inez Jackson." He seemed to think she could implicate her common-law husband, all-story Simon.
Okay, so Porter points them towards Simon.
Right, so the students in Cialino, they follow that lead. They managed to track down all-story Simon's nephew, a guy named Walter Jackson, who was actually in prison at the time. And in January 1999, Walter gives them a statement. He says that way back, shortly after the murders in '82, Allstory had confessed the whole thing to him.
Confessed? What did he supposedly say?
Walter claimed Allstory told him he'd killed Hillard and Green because of a dispute over drug money. And then right after, he fled Chicago, taking Walter with him.
Okay, so now you have a potential alternative suspect, all-story Simon, and a motive drugs, and a witness claiming a confession.
Exactly. So the next step was finding all-story Simon himself. Cialino located him living in Milwaukee. Simon, at first, denied everything, said he had nothing to do with the murders.
But something changed his mind.
Well, according to the accounts that came out later detailed in the sources, the turning point seemed to be when, while Cialino was there talking to him, all-story Simon reportedly saw his estranged wife, Inez Jackson, on TV.
On TV?
Yeah, apparently giving a televised confession implicating him.
Whoa. Okay, that would certainly add pressure.
It seemed to. Seeing that, combined with, whatever pressure Cialino was applying, it apparently changed everything. Because on February 3rd, 1999, all-story Simon gave Paul Cialino a videotaped confession.
A videotaped confession. And what did he say in it?
In the video, he claimed he shot Jerry Hillard, but said it was self-defense during some kind of fight. And he claimed Marilyn Green was shot accidentally during the struggle.
Okay, now, we need to pause here.
Yeah.
Because it's really critical to mention. The sources also detail some very significant allegations that came out later about how that confession was obtained from Simon.
Right. Absolutely. These allegations are central to the next phase of this story, the part where Simon's own conviction gets challenged. The claims included that Cialino and maybe others used deceptive tactics.
Like what?
Well, the big one was showing Simon a video that included an actor, a man named Peter Novus, who was pretending to be an eyewitness, pretending he saw Simon commit the crime.
They used an actor to fake an eyewitness account, to get a confession. That immediately raises huge questions about whether that confession was reliable or voluntary.
Huge questions. It certainly does. But back then, in early 1999, you had Simon's videotaped confession, plus you had William Taylor's recantation of his original testimony against Porter. And based on that, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, they moved very quickly.
How quickly?
Just 2 days after Simon gave that videotaped confession, on February 5th, 1999, Anthony Porter walked out of prison, released on bail after spending 17 years on death row.
17 years. Wow.
The charges against Porter were officially dropped the next month. And the narrative, the one everyone heard, was that the students' amazing work had found the real killer, all-story Simon.
And Simon then pleaded guilty.
Later that year, yes. All-story Simon pleaded guilty to the murder of Hillard and involuntary manslaughter for Green. He got a sentence of 37.5 years.
You can just imagine the scene back then, the relief, the public celebration when Porter got out, a man freed from death row. It looked like such a clear case of innocence finally proven.
Oh, absolutely. Huge news.
But the sources make it really clear that this wasn't the clean, happy ending it looked like at first glance.
No, definitely not. It was maybe the end of one chapter, yeah, but it was really the beginning of a whole new one filled with fresh doubts and, frankly, more human suffering. Anthony Porter's release, though, it did become this incredibly powerful symbol.
Right, a symbol of wrongful conviction, problems with the death penalty, all across the U.S.
Exactly. And his case is directly credited, explicitly cited, as the main reason why the governor of Illinois at the time, George Ryan, decided in January 2000 to declare a moratorium on all executions in the state.
Wow, so it had that direct an impact on state policy.
Huge impact. Ryan even said, specifically mentioning Porter, that he cannot support a system fraught with error. He said Porter's survival wasn't because the system worked, but because it didn't work and needed outside help, meaning the journalism students.
So Professor Protests, the Medill students, Paul Cialino, they were hailed as heroes, basically.
Absolutely. They got awards, accolades. The Medill Innocence Project became legendary, really inspired a lot of similar efforts elsewhere.
But you're saying behind all that acclaim, cracks were already showing in this news story. The one where Simon was the killer.
Yeah, pretty much right away. Almost as soon as he was convicted, All Story Simon started recanting that videotaped confession from prison. He started claiming it was coerced, that the Medill team had pressured him into it.
Okay, so Simon starts saying he was forced. And then there was another layer of complexity too, right? Something about Simon's own lawyer.
Yes, another really concerning detail noted in the sources involves Simon's defense attorney, a guy named Jack Rimland. It came out later that Rimland apparently shared office space with Paul Cialino, the private investigator who got Simon's confession.
Shared office space. That sounds like a potential conflict of interest right there.
A huge potential conflict. And Rimland also allegedly advised Simon to take that plea deal. So you have questions about whether Simon got truly independent legal advice.
It almost echoes the problems with Porter's original lawyer, doesn't it? Suggesting maybe both men at different points didn't get the kind of defense they should have.
It really does highlight a potential systemic vulnerability, yeah. Inadequate or conflicted representation cropping up again.
So while Simon is in prison claiming coercion, what about Anthony Porter? He's free, but life wasn't suddenly easy for him, was it?
No, not at all. His life after exoneration was incredibly difficult, based on the sources. He only got about $145,000 in state compensation for 17 years lost on death row.
That seems incredibly low.
It does, and he struggled massively trying to rebuild his life. There's that famous quote where he told a reporter something like, "Everybody keeps talking about a job. They took 17 years out of my life. What kind of job am I going to do?" It really captures that struggle.
Yeah. He faced money problems, housing instability, substance abuse issues too, right?
All of that. He even filed a big civil lawsuit, $24 million, against the city of Chicago and the police involved in his original conviction.
And what happened with that?
Well, this is pretty shocking. In that civil trial, the city actually argued that Porter was the real murderer, even though he'd been exonerated and Simon convicted.
Wait, the city argued he did do it in the civil trial after he was exonerated.
Yes. And the jury in that civil case, they sided with the city and the police officers, down against Porter. It must have been just a devastating blow. Like the system freed him, but still didn't fully believe he was innocent.
That's just awful. And his later life continued to be hard.
Yeah, his struggles continued. He was arrested in 2011 for shoplifting deodorant, ended up serving a year in prison for that. It just tragically highlights how exoneration isn't some magic fix. The damage from being wrongly locked up, especially on death row, it runs incredibly deep and it lasts.
And his death.
His death in July 2021 from an opioid overdose at age 66. It's just a really tragic final chapter. As the Chicago Torture Justice Center pointed out when he died, the systemic failures didn't just put him in prison, they also abused and abandoned him even after he got out. There just wasn't enough support.
These post-release struggles, they're such a crucial, often overlooked part of these stories. It shows the system's failure didn't just stop when the prison gates opened.
Exactly. Which brings us to the whole unraveling of the All Story Simon conviction. The second exoneration in this same case. Simon's claims of coercion, they started gaining serious traction, especially around 2005.
Why then? What happened around 2005?
That's when both Inez Jackson Simon's estranged wife, whose TV confession supposedly helped break him, and her nephew Walter Jackson, the one who claimed Simon confessed to him back in '82.
Yeah.
Both of them recanted their stories, completely took back what they'd told the Medill team.
Both of them recanted.
Yeah.
So the key witnesses against Simon suddenly say they made it all up?
Basically, yes.
Right.
They claimed they had fabricated their accounts. They said they did it hoping to get money and help from Professor Protest and his project to get their own relatives out of prison, Walter Jackson himself and Inez's son.
Okay, if the recantations are true, then the whole foundation for the case against Simon just evaporates.
Pretty much. And it lined up perfectly with what All Story Simon had been saying all along from prison, that he was coerced, particularly by Paul Cialino.
And Simon gave specific details about how he was supposedly coerced, right?
He did. He laid out specific allegations. He claimed Cialino and others pretended to be police officers, and centrally, that he was shown that videotape with the actor, Peter Navis, posing as an eyewitness. Cialino himself later admitted showing Simon that video, by the way.
Admitted using an actor in a fake witness video. That tactic just seems so problematic.
Highly controversial, yes. Simon also alleged he was promised things if he confessed, like a shorter sentence, maybe book and movie deals down the line.
Wow.
And he described being directly threatened and intimidated. He claimed Cialino had a gun at one point, used phrases like, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." There was even that really disturbing quote attributed to Cialino, something like, "I don't have any rules. The Supreme Court says that I can lie, cheat, do anything I can to get him to say what I got to get him to say." True or not, These allegations painted a picture of a really aggressive, maybe even manipulative investigation to get that confession.
And these issues weren't just about the Simon case, right? They caused wider problems.
Yeah, they definitely contributed to wider controversy, including back at Northwestern University. In 2011, Professor Protess himself was put on leave. The university said he'd allegedly falsified evidence in a different wrongful conviction case.
Another case.
Yeah. He later resigned from Northwestern and started a new, separate innocence project. And around that time, other reports started surfacing about potentially questionable tactics used by some students in various cases, like maybe misrepresenting who they were, things like that.
So the whole project, once so celebrated, was suddenly under intense scrutiny itself.
Exactly. Its methods, its integrity. And amidst all this swirling controversy, and with Simon still appealing, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, now under Anita Alvarez, decided they needed to take a fresh look. They launched a full reinvestigation using their Conviction Integrity Unit. It took over a year.
A year-long official review. And what did they find regarding Simon's conviction?
Their conclusions were pretty stark and very definitive about Simon's case. On October 30th, 2014, State's Attorney Alvarez held a press conference and announced that All-Story Simon's conviction was being vacated, thrown out.
Wow. And what reasons did she?
She stated publicly that the original investigation by Protess's team, the one that led to Simon's confession, involved alarming tactics. She called the methods coercive, absolutely unacceptable, and said they had deeply corroded and corrupted the whole process that led to Simon pleading guilty. So Simon was released after serving 15 years in prison.
15 years. So now you have a second man exonerated for the same crime. And the second exoneration is based on findings of serious misconduct by the very team that was celebrated for freeing the first man. It makes your head spin. It makes you question everything that came before.
It really does. It completely flipped the script and forced this major reevaluation, especially around the line between passionate advocacy for the innocent and, well, objective ethical investigation.
What happened after Simon was released?
Well, All-Story Simon filed a big federal civil rights lawsuit against Northwestern University, Professor Protess, and Paul Cialino. He alleged they basically framed him to free Porter. That lawsuit was eventually settled out of court in 2018. The amount wasn't disclosed.
But even with Simon officially exonerated, the story still wasn't settled for everyone, was it?
No, definitely not. Conflicting views persisted, and strongly. Protess and Cialino have always vigorously denied any wrongdoing. They continue to state their belief that All-Story Simon was actually guilty of the murders, despite his exoneration. Cialino even filed some defamation suits over the accusations made against him. And others in the innocence movement, like Rob Warden, who was a well-known figure, argued forcefully that Simon's original confession was credible, that the later recantations by the Jacksons weren't reliable, and that Simon's exoneration was basically wrong, maybe driven by a propaganda campaign against Protess.
This is where it gets just so deeply unsettling, isn't it? How can you have a confession, especially a videotaped one, that turns out to be so unreliable? And what does it mean when smart, involved people, lawyers, investigators, advocates, hold such completely opposite views on who is guilty, even after 2 exonerations? It really highlights how hard it can be to find the definitive truth.
It really does. It shows just how fragile truth can become, especially years after the crime, with memories maybe fading or changing, motives getting questioned, and then these really serious allegations of investigative misconduct thrown into the mix. It clouds everything.
Okay, looking back at the whole sweep of this, one thing seems undeniable: the legacy of the Anthony Porter case, particularly its direct impact on the death penalty in Illinois.
Absolutely clear impact there. His near execution and then his exoneration, largely credited to the students, that was the catalyst. Governor Ryan's moratorium in 2000, that led to a commission which recommended major reforms. When the legislature didn't act fast enough, Ryan took that dramatic step in 2003, commuting the sentences of all 167 inmates on death row to life imprisonment.
All of them. Wow.
All of them. And that whole momentum, really starting with Porter, directly led to Illinois formally abolishing the death penalty in 2011. They replaced it with life without parole.
And the statistics they cited were pretty stark, weren't they?
Yeah, by the time of abolition, Illinois had exonerated 20 people from death row, compared to having carried out only 12 executions since the death penalty was reinstated. That's a huge error rate. And many of those exonerations were linked to various kinds of official misconduct or flawed evidence.
The case also really sparked some crucial ethical debates, didn't it? Within journalism schools, within the innocence movement itself.
For sure. When your main goal is freeing someone you truly believe is innocent, Where do you draw the line? How far can you go? Can that intense focus on achieving a just outcome sometimes, even inadvertently, lead investigators to use questionable methods or to cross the line from investigation into advocacy in a way that maybe clouds objectivity? These became really pressing questions.
And the all-story Simon part of this saga, tragically, it just hammers home another painful lesson, doesn't it, about confessions.
Absolutely. It reinforces that even evidence that seems really solid, like a confession, especially one on videotape, can be false. It can be coerced. It can lead to its own terrible miscarriage of justice. It really shatters that old idea that a confession is always the absolute gold standard of evidence.
And then we circle back, finally and sadly, to Anthony Porter's end. His death in 2021 from that overdose. It's just this final, heartbreaking reminder that getting out of prison isn't the end of the story. Exoneration doesn't just magically heal the deep wounds.
No, it doesn't. As the Chicago Torture Justice Center put it, the systemic failures that abused and abandoned him continued long after he walked free. The lack of adequate support was a huge factor.
His story really is a testament to that. The system's failure didn't end with his release. It followed him tragically for the rest of his life.
And the final, lingering fact. The original crime. The very thing that started this whole decades-long tragedy, the murders of Marilyn Green and Jerry Hillard back in 1982, remains officially unsolved.
So this isn't just history we're talking about. This story, it forces you listening to really confront these fundamental questions. What does justice actually mean? What are the pressures inside the legal system that can lead to such errors? And what's the profound, often irreparable impact these errors have on real human lives?
It really is a chronicle of a system that appears to have failed repeatedly, not just once, arguably, by convicting Anthony Porter, but then possibly a second time, through the flawed, corrupted process that led to all-story Simon's conviction and then his eventual exoneration.
The human cost is just immense when you tally it up. For the victims' families, still no closure, no definitive answers. For Anthony Porter, 17 years lost, a life of struggle afterwards ending tragically. And for all-story Simon, 15 years lost to a conviction later deemed corrupt.
It's a cascade of failures touching every part of the process. Policing, the defense lawyers, judicial review, investigative ethics, even the support systems, or lack thereof, after release.
And through it all, despite 2 exonerations, countless investigations, lawsuits, media coverage, the original crime, who actually killed Marilyn Green and Jerry Hillard, is still a cold case. The fundamental question remains unanswered.
It does.
Which leaves us and leaves you with a really powerful, kind of unsettling thought to mull over. If even the efforts that are specifically designed to correct injustice can sometimes go so wrong, maybe leading to new injustices through questionable methods, and if the system struggles so profoundly to provide real closure and meaningful support, even when innocence is supposedly proven, what does that tell us about how incredibly difficult and how immensely important the whole pursuit of justice actually is?
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Until next time, take care and keep your chores company.